All right, let's get started, shall we? The first topic for tonight is one that I've never really talked about publicly, but for my Lacrosse School University members, for my coaching clients, been talking about this for years. This idea that primarily things boil down to the top. People think this is baiting, but it's not. It's not baiting. This is flat out like guessing. And uh, the reason why I'm covering this is because I believe that we're at a tipping point. If you guys haven't seen my latest video called "It All Starts with a Goalie," just go to lacrossegoalieuniversity.com. It's on the homepage there. But the uh, the video is called "It All Starts with a Goalie," and the more goalie audits I do, the more coaching I do. Um, Especially at lower and lower levels, like it used to just be like college goalies. I talked about this but then it got into like seniors in high school, and it was like junior seniors, and then it was like varsity lacrosse, and it was like the JV lacrosse, and it was like holy smokes, the guys and the girls can rip it, and and so what that let me think about is like I think a lot about how other goalies play sports, like how an ice hockey goalie plays, because primarily I was a soccer goalie, I was an ice hockey goalie, I was a field lacrosse goalie, I was a baseball catcher for a little bit. So I kind of come at this with a little bit of a different perspective, like not just a lacrosse goalie perspective, and that's where I see what I feel are a lot of faults in as the way goalies are taught, the way they're coached, what they put up with culturally, and the balls are just whizzing by goalies where shots that used to be savable, like a long pole ripping the ball from 15, 16, 17 yards, like even though it was fast, goalies could get to it, and now they're beating goalies like stick side high, which is always problematic. And then, I thought a little bit about um, how the difference between uh, coaches that think about, like, when they're coaching goalies, they're thinking about how they got shot on, right? Like they're putting themselves in the goalie's shoes, like they were back, 15, 20, 30 years ago. And they're envisioning those shooters. And they might even tell you, like, oh, yeah, there was this guy and he was played for like Bryan and Toyota and, or played for the Cannons or whatever. And oh, man, that guy can rip it. And their idea of ripping it does not equate to what is it, what you would define as rip it today. All right. So if your goalie feels frustrated, and if you were a goalie or if you coached goalies and then you feel frustrated, I'm going to talk about why. So in soccer, all right, you guys have all seen a soccer game and you've all seen a penalty kick. And so what do goalies do in soccer with penalty kicks is they guess, they commit, right? And they commit. And so I did some research on this and I pulled up an article that I think you guys will find interesting. And I'll leave that in the comments for those of you guys that are here. And you can kind of poke around on this one a little bit later if you want. Um, but the idea here is that uh, you know, I always say this about lacrosse. Lacrosse is a sport that has a lot of money, but there's no research. And you know, um, I'm hoping that changes with Jason Vescovi, Dr. Jason Vescovi, that got hired by US Lacrosse this last year, who's a PhD. I actually met Jason a bunch of years ago up here in Alberta when we were both working with some of the best tennis players in Alberta, and so he is now the director, like risk management and sports science for US Lacrosse. So I think it's really kind of cool. But anyway, um, but the idea here is that soccer is a billion, billions of people play soccer. There's billions of dollars in that sport, and there's research. And so one of the research bits that I found was this article on Insider, businessinsider.com. And it's a story that I'd heard a number of years ago. I think this came back to like 2014, where Manchester United and Chelsea were playing. And what they did was they hired basically a bunch of economists, a bunch of bean counters, to figure out, to do some research on the tendencies, the shooting tendencies of. I think in this case it was Manchester United, I believe was the team that they were researching. It was against Chelsea. It was like, so it was a Ignacio Palacios Huerta, and what they did was they did research, and he studied 11,000 penalty kicks. And this is way back in 2008 in the UEFA Champions League final. It paid off, sort of. Manchester United against Chelsea. The game came down to a penalty shootout, which was the perfect opportunity for Chelsea to put Huertas. I just like saying Huerta. Um, um, Huerta's advice into action. Along with several pointers, Huerta had given Chelsea's goalie key insight about Manchester United star Cristiano Ronaldo. Ronaldo would almost certainly kick the ball to the right if he passed on the run up. If he paused on the run up. And the advice worked. Ronaldo indeed paused and indeed kicked the ball to the right. Chelsea's goalie followed Huerta's advice and made the save. Ultimately, Manchester United won the game, but despite Chelsea's loss, it was clear that economists and statisticians can help even the odds when it comes to penalty kicks. Um, Interesting aside on this is that there is a guy that lives in Vegas who's considered one of the world's foremost sports gamblers, bettors, and uh, he's been tracked by the feds a bunch. I think he's been uh, subpoenaed a number of times because he's really good at what he does and he wins millions and millions of dollars. And he does that type of research. Like he knows that like if somebody goes down, with an injury or if like all this, just the deep diving stats, regardless of what they are, the deep diving stats to know the tendencies of a team. And so what further to this research, this idea that in soccer, they realize that it's basically a crapshoot for a goalie to make a save. More to this article in 2014, for example, 538 calculated that 72.5% of penalties in World Cup history went in. So that means your goalies have basically a 27.5% save percentage in penalty shots. For all competitions worldwide, penalty shots is even higher. And when you take a closer look, it's no wonder. Human response time takes roughly, and this is what's really important for those of you guys that coach goalies and have goalies to understand. Human response time takes roughly 1/10 of a second to kick in. Okay. The average kicker kicks a 70 mile per hour ball in soccer. Okay. Which means the goalie won't even register the ball's direction until it's about 25 feet away. It will take him another zero point 0.5 to zero point 0.7 seconds to react and reach for the ball. But by that point, it's all over. The ball's past him. Now, the goalie can improve the odds if they start to move before the ball is even kicked, but the goalie still has to basically guess a side and adjust for it to go and just go for it. So if time is the goalie's enemy, maybe we should just move the penalty kicker further back. But for now, economists are a goalie's best friend when it comes to stopping penalty kicks, and it turns out Huerta is helping a team in the 2018 World Cup, though he wouldn't tell us who. Okay, so here's the deal. In the sport of lacrosse, okay, a goalie's got to see the ball, got to know where it's going, has to move in front of that ball. And when you start to, and I think most people would agree that a good junior high school player, good high school player, will shoot the ball about 70 miles per hour or higher. Okay. Now, a lot of people like to exaggerate that. They're like, oh my God, my high school goalie, sees 110-mile-an-hour shots. I think that's a little bit of exaggeration, especially when a player is like on a sweep or moving, especially for the girls, the shot velocity goes down. So, although people like to debate that every year, but the idea is that when you look at the timing that they nailed down here for soccer goalies, human response time takes about 1/10 of a second to kick in. When you start doing the math and you start to realize that, um, their research was done on a 70-mile-per-hour ball, where now, like, okay, in the PLL and in college, we are shooting, north of 100 miles an hour at times, and shots are coming from 8 yards, 10 yards. A goalie really doesn't have much of a chance, even though that ball is shot closer to him. So that's something that this article doesn't take into consideration. It's the idea of like a soccer goalie has to travel like a distance to get to it, right? So that's why that goalie is going to cheat and to dive early. But when we look at our lacrosse goalies, and I was watching highlights of a game this weekend. I think it was the Cornell game. I can't remember. Uh, Long pole comes down on a fast break and gets the ball back at like 18 yards, rips it at like 17, 16 and a half yards, and beats the goalie like stick side high. What that shows me is that the goalie, uh, first is hoping the ball goes or anticipating the ball is going to go somewhere else. Okay, somewhere else other than stick side high. And so, because if they were anticipating the ball was going to go stick side high, you would just see a simple like 2-inch movement and they would make a save, unless they're playing with an eclipse and the eclipse bends in half and the ball goes in the net anyway. But the idea is that I believe that lacrosse has gotten so complex and the velocities are so high for both the men and the women that when you take into consideration that the goalie has to see the ball, has to, identify where it's going and then move in front of it, well, that goalie sure as heck has to get something else on the ball other than the stick because you can't get the stick there. And I'm going to cover that in the later video tonight and show you a really good video in the last segment tonight. So stay tuned for that. But the idea is like, well, should a goalie guess? Should a goalie start to guess where that ball is going to go? Well, some people would say like, well, no, 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 you can't guess because a shooter would just like, read that and go somewhere else. Well, or a crafty shooter will just hide the stick. Well, so I agree with you 100%. But one of the things when I look at a lot of video, what you notice is that there's not a lot of, with the exception of like a low to high shot, there's not a lot of, to use a George Bush term, like trickeration or strategery. Kids are just pretty much like eyeing up the goal and ripping it uh, because they don't feel like they have to do anything tricky, right? Even at the pro level. Guys aren't like trying to spin the ball off the turf. Sometimes they do, but for the most part, they don't. Like you'll see an Instagram video or somebody does, like I think Pearl did a video a couple of weeks ago where, they just slow mo of a guy like turning the stick head over and spinning the ball. And yeah, it looks like a handball shot that goes like way wide and spins and comes back in the net. But the idea is that your goalie um, doesn't have to deal with a lot of complexity because the shooters are just trying to rip it by him anyway. And so that's where I believe the strategic approach of the goalie has to change, and the goalie has to play bigger in the cage, has to come out, to the top of the crease or beyond for the boys, especially to play big because that's their only chance to get that shot. Like, how many times have you seen a goalie get um, I saw a shot this weekend, and maybe I'll cover it in a future video for my Lacrosse Goal University members. I'm going to try to get it in the forum for you guys, but this attackman comes around, side right, drives like up the hash, and just turned and ripped it like around his defender, and the goalie had no chance because he couldn't see the ball soon enough, then couldn't identify where the ball was going, and then couldn't get his stick on it, and it was going high, so it's a shot that has to be saved with a stick. But the idea when you start to kind of nail down these ideas of like what the hell are we doing and what gives the goalie the best chance to save the ball, there's baiting, right? That the idea of baiting, where you are basically anticipating, you're basically hedging your bets, right? I like to use the example of watching like poker on ESPN, where they'll show like one player's hand and they'll say like, oh, he's got a 23% chance to win, and this other guy, oh, he's got a 76 or 77% chance to win. Well, as a goalie, I think to kind of play next level, there are times when you have to kind of go, all right, listen, the odds of this guy trying to sneak one by my hip is 2%. The odds of him shooting 5-hole, well, maybe that's 50%. The odds of him sneaking it up stop, that's another 25%. And then you divide everything else out and their little percentages. So you're basically going like you're prioritizing one space, and then you're basically putting those priorities in order. So 5-hole in this situation might be the highest priority. Off your off stick ear might be the secondary priority. Third priority might be stick side hip. It all depends on where the shot's coming from, but the idea is as a goalie, you're making those judgments as the play develops, and then as the shot is finally released, and then who's shooting it. Like, does she have a hell of a shot, or is she more tricky and crafty? Is it a long pull or not? Um, but then you got to understand, like, what are you teaching the goalie? Because I was looking at a video yesterday of a goalie who was playing up against a really good team. This is like one of the top teams in their state. There are a couple D1 commits on this team, and this for this goalie, this was the highest, how should you call it, like highest quality of team that he had been up against. And so there were shots that went by this goalie that, because of their training age, they just don't have the experience yet to face that. But I've seen even, D1 recruitable goalies getting ripped by, right? Where the ball is just, just they're barely moving. And I think in the Notre Dame Ohio State game last week, I think a couple times the Notre Dame goalie was like, what the where the hell that ball come from? So the idea here is, as a goalie, is like you got to hedge your bets. You got to hedge your bets, and you've got to, you know make some, because this is where, when you use the scorecards, when your goalie is doing their stats, they start to know that, okay, when a certain type of shot happens, might be um, might be a sweep across the front of the cage, might be a time and room shot within a certain distance. The goalie should be able to know, because you've done the statistics, that their save percentage drops, right, for certain shots, and they have a better chance of saving others. Well, on those shots where, if your save percentage, and this is where, you can also track, like, did they just hit you? Right? Because as a goalie, one thing, when you look at saves, there's saves where you made a big move, a big dynamic move, and made a save. There's other saves where you didn't move. Maybe it's a player comes around from behind the cage and tries to stuff it on the goalie fast, but the goalie just holds their stick there and they shoot it right in their stick. Well, that registers as a save, but as a goalie, you're going like, well, I didn't do anything for that. Or maybe they hit you off the head, right? That registers off a save, but you didn't move. You just stood there, right? Or maybe you took it off the cup. Good for you, right? But the idea is that, uh, in terms of, like, how do we improve the save percentage of a goalie, there are probably certain situations that are too long to talk about here, where a goalie would be better off guessing, right? Playing that percentage game and understanding, what's up. Now, to this businessinsider.com article, you can look at that and go, okay, well, they've done tendency, like shooting tendencies. And, when you watch enough college games, you will see that. You will see players where they like a certain type of shot, low to high, right? Or high to low, or right over the top, or sidearm, or high to high, like whatever. um, you can start to develop those tendencies. And this is where I feel like the sport of field lacrosse is very, very far behind in that type of scouting. I see it in high school hockey, I see it in high school football, where, coaches will share tapes, right? But, like, we don't do that much in lacrosse, do we? And, a lot of my goalies, like, they might know a couple players on the other team. They might have met one at a summer league, or, a summer club team, and go like, "Oh yeah, I remember that kid. He likes to do this." But, well, that's part of scouting, right? That's part of understanding what a player likes to do in certain situations. Like, I know in ice hockey, for example, like, there's books on players. So every team has, like, a scout or a couple scouts, where they will keep a book on opposing teams' players, and goalies will read those books, and they will know that, like, okay, if it's a 2-on-1, this guy likes to shoot instead of pass, or this guy likes to, on a penalty shot, this guy likes to deke and go backhand top shelf, like whatever. So your goalie, if they're, serious about this, they'll start to do that type of data catching, right? And data, whatchamacallit, data research. Okay. So yeah, so the idea of guessing is something where, you know, um, uh, it's something that I like. I call it, like, it's not proactive guessing, it's not baiting either, but it's basically deciding, like, okay, in this situation, where are we going to go with this ball? What are the odds? Where's this kid going to shoot? How are they going to shoot? What are they going to do with it? Are they going to bounce it? Do they like to bounce it? Do they like to go high to high, low to high, whatever? But the idea is, like, doing that sorts of statistics is important because for like a professional World Cup level soccer goalie, they are lucky at the World Cup level if they're saving 27.5%, right? 27.5% of penalty shots. And, and that's not too far away, right? I'm just Googling this. How far is the penalty spot in soccer? I looked this up before. 12 yards. So if at 12 yards, if at 12 yards a soccer goalie is struggling with making a save, then yeah. And now you can dig into this data more and more, like because there's data here that is not covered in this article that with some research would probably help a lacrosse goalie, which is like, so let's say a soccer goalie guesses left but still misses it. Well, for a lacrosse goalie that only has to cover basically a yard to either to the right or their left, right? Because the net's like 6x6 to a yard right or left. Well, if they were to guess to that half, would they be able to make that save because they're now in that space? Right. So this is especially, I think, important on 8 meters for girls. It's definitely important for the guys because we're just seeing the statistics just show like the goalies are getting scored on further and further away from the net because the velocity of the shots are coming up and the technology of the sticks is going up and yada yada. So you got to keep that in mind. So is guessing a valid tactic for a goalie? I think it's time to argue yes. And how we teach it, well, I'll just keep that to myself for now, but it's something that's really important. Deb Griffin, I see you. All right. All right, guys, thanks for watching and thanks for listening wherever you are. Do me a favor, hit the like button if you like this and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. When you're ready, head on over to lacrossegoalieuniversity.com/coaching so I can work with you and your goalie. And while you're at it, check out athletespecific.com to learn more about mental performance and high performance. You may not know this, but I work with athletes in a variety of sports. Lacrosse is my love, but man, I love athletes and the families who support them. So head on over to athletespecific.com, check it out. I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.